Who labeled my seat with that? I whispered, staring at the card that felt heavier than the gold jewelry on my wrists. It didn't say mother of the groom. It didn't even say my name. Just 4 words. Low education mother. I blinked, hoping I'd misread. But no, bold and clear, as if someone wanted to make a point. A cruel one. I stood frozen at the edge of the lavish hall, the chandeliers sparkling above me while laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. I wasn't crying, not yet. But something inside me cracked. The boy I raised on roti and ration cards, the boy I skipped meals for, the boy I sold my bangles to educate, had let this happen? The guests walked past me, barely glancing at the label pinned to the elegant chair. Some smiled. Some didn't even notice. But that label burned itself into my memory like a scar dot. I was just 23 when I held him for the first time. The delivery room was dimly lit, a government hospital barely functioning under the weight of its own neglect. The ceiling fan creaked above, the tube light flickered like it was unsure if it still wanted to shine, and the nurse barely glanced at me as she handed him over. My arms trembled, not from weakness, but from awe. His skin was so soft, almost translucent, and his tiny fingers instinctively curled around mine like he had been waiting for me all along. I named him Ion, a name that meant gift of God. Because that's exactly what he was. Not a burden. Not a mistake. But a miracle in the shape of a boy. His father had vanished months before the birth. One day, he was rubbing my belly and making promises about building a cradle with his own hands. The next, he was gone. Left nothing but a note scribbled in shaky handwriting. I'm not ready to be a father. I stared at that note for hours, hoping if I looked long enough, the words would rearrange themselves into something else. I'll be back, I promise. But they never did. He never did. We didn't have much. No savings. No support. No one waiting outside the hospital doors. Just me and Ion, wrapped in an old shawl, stepping into a world that didn't slow down to make room for new mothers or fatherless children. I stitched clothes from home. My hands became blistered, needle-marked, but I kept going. At night, I worked double shifts in a factory that smelled of rust and burnt wires. On weekends, I quietly washed dishes in the kitchens of the rich, wiping away traces of their lavish dinners while dreaming about how I'd feed Ion a proper breakfast the next morning. But Ion never knew. I never let him see the cracked skin on my hands or the tears I cried into my pillow when I didn't know if I could make rent. I made sure his world was softer than mine. He always had clean uniforms, even if I had to wash them in cold water with bar soap and dry them under the ceiling fan overnight. His lunchbox was always full, maybe not with fancy snacks, but with love-wrapped rotis and the occasional treat I'd save up for. I was always the loudest cheer at his parent-teacher meetings, clapping like he'd just won a Nobel Prize, even if all he did was memorize the multiplication table. I couldn't help him with algebra. I barely understood his homework. I didn't know what GPA meant or why it mattered so much. But I sat beside him anyway, every single night. While he solved problems and drew diagrams under the yellow glow of our one-table lamp, I sat cross-legged on the floor with a cup of chai in my hand, whispering silent prayers for his future. There were nights he would look up, frustrated, and ask, "Amy, what if I fail?" And I would smile, even though my chest tightened with fear, and say, "Then we'll try again, Beta. You and me. We never quit." I didn't raise him with riches. But I raised him with hope, with presence, and with the kind of love that wraps itself around every failure and says, "You're still worthy." Ion may have never seen the battles I fought in silence, but I fought them so he wouldn't have to. That hospital room may have been empty that day, but in my arms, holding that little boy, I felt fuller than I'd ever been in my entire life. He passed every exam. Every single one. From the first spelling test in grade school to the nerve-wracking entrance exams for college, Ion never let failure define him. I watched him bloom, first into a confident teenager with books always tucked under his arm, then into a man with dreams far bigger than the tiny apartment we shared. When he got a scholarship to a top university in the city, I cried. Not just because I was proud, but because I knew what it had cost him. All those nights we stayed up, all those sacrifices. All the times he refused to go out with friends so he could save money for textbooks. All the times he studied by candlelight because the electricity bill hadn't been paid. I remember the day he called me, breathless and laughing. "Amma, I got the job. A multinational firm. Good salary. Real office." I dropped the ladle in my hand and covered my mouth. I was standing barefoot in the kitchen, stirring dal, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My son had made it. My Ion, the boy who once cried over fractions, had grown into a man who conquered boardrooms. He told everyone his success was because of his mother's sacrifice. At his graduation, he made a speech. His voice cracked when he said, "Everything I am is because of Miami." I remember the applause, the strangers shaking my hand, the professors smiling warmly at me. That day, I stood tall. Not because I was. Because the beginning of everything was him. But then, things changed. At first, it was small things. Missed calls. Short replies. Delayed visits. He said he was busy, and I believed him. Success has its price, I thought. He's working hard, building a life. I can wait. But the distance grew wider. Months would pass without him stepping into the house he once studied in, cried in, prayed in. I kept his room just the same, books still stacked on the shelf, his medals still hanging by the mirror. "Amy, I'm swamped this week. Maybe next month? Amy, I'll call you later." In a meeting. Once, I decided to surprise him at his office with homemade kheer, his favorite. I traveled 2 hours on a crowded bus, clutching the container like it was made of glass. When I reached and gave his name at the reception, the woman behind the desk made a call, then told me gently, "He says he's in a meeting and can't come down." Later that evening, he called. "Amma, please don't come to my office unannounced again. It's not professional." I didn't say anything. I just apologized. And then came the wedding. Not once did he tell me he was seeing someone. Not once did he ask me to meet her or her family. One day, he simply said, "I'm getting married next month." I blinked. "So soon?" "It's all being managed by her family," he replied. "They're very high society. Just be there on time. Dress well. Don't talk too much. Don't talk too much." I held the phone long after he hung up. Those words clung to me like ash. I, who had once taught him how to say his first words, was now being asked to stay quiet. I ironed my old silk sari, sewed on missing beads by hand, practiced smiling in the mirror so I wouldn't look out of place. The wedding hall was glittering. Chandeliers, violins, champagne. People stared at me like I didn't belong. Maybe I didn't. The boy I raised, who once held my finger crossing the street, was now walking ahead of me, arm in arm with another woman, never once looking back. And for the first time since the day he was born, I felt alone again. I bought a gold-colored sari with money I didn't have. Borrowed from a neighbor I'd once helped during a tough winter. She didn't ask questions, just pressed the notes into my hand and said, "Go look beautiful. It's your son's big day." I spent hours choosing that sari. Gold, with delicate thread work, just enough sparkle to seem elegant, but not too loud. I wanted to look respectable, worthy, like someone who belonged. I even bought heels. My first pair. Practiced walking around the house in them for days, wobbling at first, then slowly mastering each step like I was preparing for a stage performance. I memorized a few English phrases, "Thank you for coming," and "You look lovely today." I wasn't sure when I'd use them, but I wanted to be ready. I wanted to make Ion proud. The morning of the wedding, I woke before the sun, pressed my sari 3 times, tied my hair in a neat bun, pinned jasmine into it, the way his grandmother used to. I looked into the mirror and whispered, "You're his mother. Today is your day too." But the moment I entered the wedding hall, I knew. I knew I didn't belong. The lights were dazzling. The chandeliers sparkled like a sky full of stars. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of canapes I couldn't even name. A live violinist played in the corner. And everywhere, polished people, women in gowns that shimmered, men in tuxedos with wine glasses and perfect smiles. I felt it immediately. The pause in conversations. The quick glances. The smiles that didn't reach their eyes. But I kept walking, holding my clutch like a lifeline. I smiled, nodded, searched for my son, until my eyes fell on something that made my breath stop. A small table near the entrance. Nameplates for family members, gold calligraphy on black velvet. I leaned in, heart pounding. There it was. Low. Education. Mother. 3 words. That's all. No name. No identity. Just a label, like I was a category, not a person. I touched it gently as if maybe I'd read it wrong. Maybe it was a joke. A misprint. But before I could even breathe, I heard her voice. A woman walked past me, elegant, tall, eyes straight ahead. Her perfume lingered in the air like something expensive. Without turning, she said, "We didn't know your actual name." He just mentioned that. I stared after her. Mention what? Low education mother. Was that how my son, my Ion, introduced me? Not Amy. Not Razia Begum. Not the woman who raised me alone, who sacrificed everything for me. Just that. I sat quietly in the corner of the hall. No one came to talk. No one asked if I was okay. A few nodded politely before turning away. I watched Ion from afar, smiling, laughing, surrounded by her family. He looked happy. And why wouldn't he be? He had arrived. He belonged to a world that didn't know me, didn't want to know me. And somewhere along the way, he learned not to bring me along. When he finally came over, hours later, he hugged me briefly. "Amma, you made it. You look nice." I wanted to ask. About the nameplate. About what she said. About why he never told them my name. But I just smiled and said, "Congratulations, Beta." Because that's what mothers do, don't they? Even when they're broken, they stay whole for their children. But deep inside, something in me shattered that night. Not because I was ashamed of who I was, but because my son was. During the vows, he never looked at me. The hall was silent, reverent, as the priest recited sacred words beneath a canopy of white roses. Ion stood tall, his voice steady and full of promise. His bride beamed beside him, eyes glistening with joy. Cameras flashed. Guests sighed. But in that entire moment, when the world watched him take the most important step of his life, his eyes never searched for mine. Not once. When he spoke about his upbringing, he paused to thank the people who instilled values and strength in him. Then he turned toward her parents, smiled, and said, "Your love and guidance shaped who I am today." A wave of applause followed. And I just sat there, quiet, invisible, dying inside. I folded my hands in my lap, fingers clenched around the edge of my sari. My heels pinched, my shoulders stiff from holding myself together for so long. I had memorized a few smiles for the night, rehearsed nods. But in that moment, I didn't remember any of them. All I could think was, he doesn't see me anymore. After dinner, people danced. Music filled the air. Her family clinked glasses and toasted to new beginnings. I slipped out of the spotlight and found a quieter corner where the noise turned into a dull hum in the distance. And then I saw him, Ion, standing by the dessert table, talking to someone in a suit. He looked older than I remembered. More polished. More distant. I walked to him slowly, my voice barely a whisper. "Ion." He turned, startled, his smile fading. "Amma, I won't take much time," I said. But was the nameplate really necessary? He looked around nervously, then stepped slightly to the side, away from the crowd. "Amma, please don't make a scene." A scene? My eyes stung, but I swallowed it down. "I'm not making a scene, Beta. I'm asking a question. Why did they call me low education mother? Why not my name?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Her family's they're sensitive about these things. Status. Background. They asked for information and I told them you weren't formally educated." I stared at him. "So you erased my name?" He looked down. Said nothing. In that silence, 1,000 memories screamed inside me. The nights I stayed awake sewing buttons so he wouldn't go to school with torn cuffs. The meals I skipped so he'd have an extra boiled egg in his lunchbox. The factory burns. The secret tears. The chai-stained prayers whispered beside his textbooks. All of it compressed into 3 cold words on a nameplate. "I wasn't asking to be honored, Ion," I said quietly. just remembered. He still didn't look at me. I wanted him to say something, anything. To explain, to apologize, to offer even the smallest flicker of understanding. But his silence was louder than any scream I'd ever heard. It echoed through the hollow parts of me, where pride used to live. So I nodded, straightened my sorry, and walked away. That night, as fireworks lit the sky and guests cheered for the new couple, I waited by the road for a rickshaw. Alone. No goodbyes. No hugs. Just the soft sound of gold-threaded fabric brushing against cold pavement. Because sometimes, the deepest pain isn't betrayal. It's being forgotten by the very person you gave everything for. I didn't shout. Didn't cry. There was no grand scene. No slamming of doors. No shaking voices. Just the quiet ache of a mother who had finally accepted something she had fought against for years. I was no longer part of his world. The music still played. The laughter still echoed. Somewhere behind me, Ion and his bride were cutting the cake while cameras clicked and people clapped, capturing perfect memories. But none of those moments belonged to me. I walked back to the entrance. Past the guests who no longer noticed I was there. Past the staff who smiled politely without knowing why my eyes were wet. And then I stopped in front of the table. The nameplate was still there. Low. Education. Mother. I stared at it for a long time. My reflection glinted faintly in the gold lettering. A stranger might have passed by and assumed it was some formal label, part of a seating chart or tradition. But to me, it was a wound, a reminder of how small I had been made to feel. I didn't tear it. Didn't throw it away. I simply picked it up gently, like something fragile. Folded it once. Then again. Tucked it inside my clutch. Because even if the world had chosen to forget who I was, I hadn't. And with that, I turned. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. There was no one left to say it to. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I walked toward the exit. Each step felt lighter, as though I was shedding years of waiting, hoping, and breaking silently. Outside, the air was cool. The night sky stretched above me, full of stars that didn't care about wealth, or titles, or education. A gentle breeze tugged at my sorry, and for the first time all evening, I felt like I could breathe. I stood at the edge of the road for a moment, watching cars pass, watching a group of laughing guests gather near the entrance, wine glasses in hand, oblivious to the woman walking away from a life she once thought was her purpose. A rickshaw stopped beside me. The driver looked young, unsure. Where to? I smiled softly. Home. He nodded. I climbed in. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time, not at the people, but at the glowing hall. The lights. The celebration. Then I turned my gaze forward. I had raised a son with nothing but my hands, my heart, and my sleepless nights. I had taught him kindness, humility, strength. And yes, he had grown into a man of success, but somewhere along the way, he had left behind the very roots that nurtured him. Still, I didn't regret the years I gave him. I didn't regret the sacrifices, the pain, the sleepless nights. Love doesn't always return the way we imagine it will. Sometimes it flows in one direction, like a river that nourishes everything in its path, yet never receives anything back from the sky. But I walked away with dignity, with the quiet strength only a mother carries. And in my clutch, folded neatly, was the nameplate. A souvenir not of shame, but of survival. Because while the world may call me low education mother, I know the truth. I am the reason he could stand tall. Even if he no longer remembered where his strength came from. It had been months. The wedding had passed. So had the silence. I had returned to my routine, the hum of the sewing machine in the early mornings, the chai simmering on the stove, the sound of the street vendors outside my window. Life moved on, not dramatically, but steadily, like a river that refused to stop flowing even after the heaviest storm. I didn't expect him to return. Not after everything. And yet, one morning, just as the first rays of sun filtered through the curtains and I was threading my needle for a blouse order, I heard a knock. Not loud, not rushed. Just a soft, hesitant knock, like the person on the other side wasn't sure if he'd be welcomed. I opened the door. There he stood. No suit. No bride. No in-laws. Just Ion. My son. His hair was longer than before, a little unkempt. His face looked tired, but his eyes were full of something I hadn't seen in a long time. Regret. Amma, he said, voice cracking. I'm sorry. I didn't speak. I just let him continue. I was ashamed, he said. Not of you. Never of you. But of what I thought they'd say. I wanted to belong in their world so badly that I forgot who built mine. I didn't lose you, Amy. I lost my own pride. He took a step forward, eyes glistening. I forgot what matters. For a brief second, he wasn't a man with a tie and an office job. I looked at him, my heart full and heavy all at once. And I hugged him, tightly. Not because everything was fixed, but because it didn't have to be perfect to begin again. We sat for hours, talking, laughing between tears. He told me things he never had the courage to before. I told him stories he had forgotten, or maybe never knew. He asked if he could come more often. I said the door had always been open. And as he walked around the small room he once called home, his eyes landed on something unexpected. The nameplate. Framed. Hanging above my sewing machine. He walked toward it slowly, reading the words again. Lo. Education. Mother. His face fell. Amy. It's okay, I said, placing a hand on his arm. I didn't keep it to shame you. Then why? I smiled. Because I wanted to remember. Not the pain, but the truth. He looked confused. The world may label us beta. They may try to define us with titles, numbers, or words meant to shame. But only we decide what those labels mean. That nameplate doesn't define my worth. It reminds me that I raised a son strong enough to return. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded. Slowly. With respect. May I frame something next to it? He asked. I smiled. What? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a photo of us from years ago. Me holding his kindergarten drawing. We were laughing. I took it and pinned it next to the frame. Two truths side by side. One a label. The other a memory stronger than any title. Because this was our new chapter. And this time, I would not be invisible.